Ooh, hello, welcome in to the Titans of Fantasy Football Podcast. Today, we are going to be covering the next fantasy superstars. So, not your typical guys right now going in the high first round, but guys that might be there next year. So, these are guys we are thinking will take it to the next level, have a good shot at becoming just otherworldly players this year. We're pretty excited about these guys because obviously a lot of potential. There's a reason they probably aren't being drafted really high in the first round, whether or not they've done it yet or they're up and coming and we haven't seen it and they're still young. But exciting one for you today. As always, I'm here with Caleb Armstrong, my co-host. I'm Garrett Daigle, and we are giddy and ready to come at you. Caleb's going to start us off with some fantasy news.
Yeah. So we didn't have anything to share really last week because we didn't want to really beat a dead horse there. There was a lot of stuff that it was kind of stagnant. The water was, you could say, and now we're getting a little spicy. We're getting closer to training camp. We are getting some some IR moves already today. You saw some potential pup moves, and we'll talk about that. And then some injury list starting. So our first one we're gonna cover here that I have is the running back dilemma going on right now in the NFL. You're hearing a lot of running backs, come out and talk about the disgruntlement they're having with not getting paid. And it all comes on the helm of Tony Pollard not getting his his extension. We had Saquon Barkley not getting an extension, and Josh Jacobs not getting an extension. All of them were tagged. Pollard is the only one who's signed the tag so far. Barkley and Jacobs have not signed their tag so far. But, like I was kind of talking with Garrett, and he was informing me that, Pollard can get, fined for not, or missing, he'll lose payments for not attending camp, where the other guys won't start losing payments until they have the game once. Could we potentially see a holdout with Barkley and Jacobs? Potentially. But, the fact is, running backs aren't getting paid. They're probably going to take the money. They're going to probably play week one. As long as they stay in condition, they should be fine. But, something to definitely keep your eye on when it comes to that. Another running back news is Pacheco possibly going to be put on the pup because of surgery. Pacheco kind of been a dark horse. I wouldn't even say a dark horse, but a sleeper favorite of most right now in the second round for like RB2 because not much competition there in the Chiefs backfield. If Pacheco is to go on the pup, that means he misses these first 6 weeks of the season. And right now, I think the RB room behind him would be McKinnon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and I think that undrafted free agent, like the Deneric Price, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, something to keep your eye on there. And then, if you do see a move like that, possibly one of these free agent running backs that we talked about who could come in and just ruin the hope for another team, like still on the free agent market. We got Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, and Zeke, all trying to find a home. So, we'll start seeing a lot more of rosters starting to fill out, cuts being made and stuff as training camp comes along here and the cuts actually start. I don't know when the exact date is that the first cut is, but you'll start seeing guys fill out. You'll start seeing injuries pop up, and then you can start seeing some of these free agents get moved. And then lastly for news, my boy, kind of saddened and struck by it all, but DeAndre Hopkins lands in a new home with the Tennessee Titans. 2-year, $32 million contract, I think $24 million guaranteed. So pretty cheap for, a guy who has been pretty consistent. Yes, he's at that pinnacle age. I think he's 30 going into a 31-year-old season. But, Hopkins came back last year with wide receiver 7 over those last games, but signed kind of a cheap contract. Very likely going to be the wide receiver 1 for Tennessee, but low volume passing offense. We'll probably eventually get down, given a breakdown on that, where we kind of land him at with that new landing spot. For now, that's the news. Garrett, you got anything to add, or should we dig into it?
Not too much. I mean, this is kind of the calm before the storm right now as we kind of get ready for training camps to begin. I think one news that's kind of exciting is we're going to be seeing the New York Jets on this year's rendition of Hard Knocks, which is pretty exciting. Get an inside look at the team. And their whole new quarterback situation with Rodgers there, and kind of how that team is going to transition from one kind of a hopeful team to what a lot of people think is a contender in a tough division. But yeah, I think that's it for now. Should we
All right.
jump right into it?
Yeah. I mean, you kind of led. Should I go? Because you're kind of leading my way into my Jets guy. So
Ooh,
a little
could we
foreshadowing
see?
there.
Could we see him on the TV?
Yes. All right. So, like Garrett kind of broke down, this is our breakout stars, superstars, guys that we said, could potentially be first round picks next year. Right now, not going in the first. This guy is the highest of all the ones that we have for ADP, and that is Garrett Wilson. Yes, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, Caleb, this guy's already a breakout. Yeah, he kind of had a good rookie season, don't get me wrong. But I think there is potential for another level here that we can see come out of Garrett Wilson. His ADP is 17 right now and half PPR, wide receiver 10 off the board. So going as a late wide receiver one, going at the turn, actually halfway through the second right now for most drafts. Um, Garrett Wilson last year, I'll give you a little back history why I said he's already kind of a breakout. Had 83 receptions on 147 targets and 1,103 yards and 4 TDs. So that's really good rookie season. But this is where I'm getting into it. Like I said, I think there's another step here that can be taken. He had 68 targets in his last 6 games. 68. He ended the year on a 17 target game. And his catch rate, he had one game where he had 11 targets and only 3 catches. And he had, so in that span of 6 games, he had 11 targets per game and averaged right around 7.5 to 8 yards per target. So that's pretty good. That's what you want to see is, downfield yardage there. But when you look at the analytics of it all, he had Zach Wilson, Zach Wilson and Mike White as his QB. Zach Wilson's completion percentage last year, 54.5%. Mike White's 58.9. We all loved Mike White, but when you really look at the whole breakdown, he had a couple good games. Everything else was kind of bleh. Now we go into Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, they get Aaron Rodgers, big trade. We broke that down in another episode. That's why probably they got selected for Hard Knocks. You got Aaron coming to town. Team's supposed to take a next step. Aaron Rodgers had one of his worst statistical seasons last year. You look at it, like everybody's saying, he's kind of falling off the edge. Still had a 65% completion percentage. So right alone, almost anywhere from 10% to 8% higher than what Mike White and Zach Wilson combined for. So there again, you're already getting an upgrade there. However, Garrett Wilson only caught 28% of the deep throws thrown to him. Pretty poor. He was actually one of the worst in the league. He was bottom 5 with a minimum of, I think it was like 20 targets. Aaron Rodgers was top 10 in deep yards and touchdowns last year. In a year where he struggled, he was still top 10 in yards. He was 7 in deep yards thrown. So a deep yards is any target that is over 15 yards. And then he had also was second in deep thrown touchdowns. So Garrett Wilson was kind of the field stretcher a little bit there for the Jets because truthfully they didn't have a whole lot there for field stretching, but he was also their top guy. But in previous years, Aaron Rodgers, his MVP seasons, yes, it's tough to go off his MVP season, but that was only 1 year removed. He was top 3 in deep yard completions in 2021 and 2020. So, Aaron, we know he likes to uncork it every once in a while, hit those big strides. Garrett Wilson, we know he's a very, very good route runner. He's got solid hands. Right now, his competition is a toss-up between wide receiver 2 and 3. Whoever lands whatever, it's going to be Corey Davis or Allen Lazard. Both of them we've seen be pretty inefficient in the past 2 years. Yes, Lazard's a great blocker. Corey Davis came over a big contract, tried to fill in that wide receiver 1 role, has not stayed healthy, and also just hasn't really filled in too solid as a wide receiver 1. He could, take over that wide receiver 2 role just based off of like the type of play style he is. But Garrett Wilson right now really doesn't have any scary targets behind him for getting a whole bunch of target share. I think right now it's got, like I said, Davis, Lazard, Mims, and Cobb. I think is the way that wide receiver room. Oh, and McCole Hardman is the way that wide receiver room rounds out with Conklin and Uzama at tight end. So no, really, I mean maybe Randall Cobb back 10 years ago, but nobody else is really too threatening there for targets. And with a you could say a massive upgrade at quarterback, even with a 39-year-old Aaron Rodgers from Zach Wilson, Mike White. 39-year-old Aaron Rodgers, give me that 11 times out of 10. So
Yeah, he's really an exciting player going into this season. He was drafted where he was and going into the NFL draft last year for a reason, and then we saw it last year. Not only does he have a really great first name, but he came out and really dominated down the stretch. Your point that you brought up about his target counts over the last 6 games is just absolutely colossal. Just dominating like 100% down the stretch. And what's funny is he had several games last year where he had mega target counts. A 14 target game, a 15 target game, a 17 target game. Those are target counts that really the only elite of the receivers in the league attain. And skilled receivers demand those targets. It's not just like this is happening in default by him being the only one there or him being a favorite on the team by a quarterback. You only get that if you are extremely skilled. So not only does he have the skill, but now he's got the quarterback to go with it. And with Rodgers, we've seen some of his top receivers really command a huge amount of touchdowns as well. Something we didn't see out of Garrett Wilson in his rookie year. He only finished with 4 of them. So he's able to juice that up a little bit, only going to help vault him higher. All right, so on to my first selection for my next fantasy superstar. I'm going to go with a running back that we saw last year kind of break out. Kind of the same thing that you mentioned, Caleb, where, hey, this was a guy we liked last year and we were excited about. But was he a true superstar? Tony Pollard, right now going off the board at ADP 22. He's the RB8, pretty high. But next year, I think we could be talking about him in a completely different light. So some highlights from last year. He finished as the RB7, averaging 14.7 points per game. And this is in half PPR. This was done all while splitting carries and snaps with Ezekiel Elliott on a team where Elliott put up 12 rushing touchdowns last year, which is, I think, one of the tops in the league. It might have been the top in the league. It's just a funny situation where you have 2 running backs that are commanding that many touches. So he was actually 4th. Sorry. So Elliott 4th in rushing touchdowns last year. Pollard finished with 9 of his own. But what's the big difference here? The staggering difference is where they came from. Elliott got his in the goal line work within the 5-10 yard line, and Pollard, his touchdowns averaged 21.4 yards in distance, with only 2 of those coming within the 5 yard line. So he was getting these clips at massive distances, which, I mean, there are some game-breaking players in the league right now that can really pull one off and score from anywhere on the field. He's showing that he's one of those guys. Now, with Elliott gone, all of a sudden that opens up a huge spot on the depth chart where, hey, Pollard's got this new opportunity for goal line touches as well. Whether that's, getting some screen plays and getting it through the air, or whether it's that goal line work and try to punch it in. We saw the offensive coordinator change. Kellen Moore has moved out. And now we have the Mike McCarthy system, which Mike McCarthy also well known for using his running back to control the clock. And he's made it very clear that they want to do that as well. So he's going to be getting a lot of work, and the rest of the depth chart behind him also extremely weak. We have a bunch of late round picks and undrafted guys. Not something where you're completely confident in somebody else stepping up to the plate and taking snaps from him. So, what I want to draw a parallel to here is we saw something similar happen years ago in San Diego with the Chargers before they moved to LA. Melvin Gordon was the first round running back, and he was eventually supplanted by undrafted running back Austin Eckler. So, kind of happened here with Elliott, where as he was aging, Pollard comes in, starts stealing snaps just because he's talented enough to get that ball from him. Even though Elliott had a still pretty good fantasy year last year, now it's Pollard's game. He's on the franchise tag. He signed it. He's ready to play. So he's reporting to camp, which is a good sign. He already signed that tag, so he's not going to be holding out of any training camp. Coming in, full practices, And, he did get injured at the end of the year last year, but it was a broken leg. It wasn't a torn ligament, so it's not something we're concerned about him coming back from. Usually that's anywhere from a 6 week to 10 week injury to recover from and then start building the strength back up. So he's had plenty of time to recover, and he's got a really exciting opportunity to take that next step.
Yeah, like you talked about the depth chart. I think we kind of mentioned it in our last podcast. I think it's Malik Davis and Ronald Jones. I think right now are kind of the
Yep.
RB2, RB3.
And then Deuce.
Jones hasn't been relevant in 2.5 years probably,
Mm-hmm.
and Malik Davis I think was undrafted free agent like last year, 2 years ago. So, like you said, not really much scariness there. The one thing that kind of sucks is, Jerry Jones isn't throwing out the door the possibility of Zeke returning, but like you said, Garrett, if the immensely amount of target or the carries Zeke got at the goal line last year was just ridiculous. For him to be so poor at, like yards per carry, but to get 12 touchdowns, those have to go somewhere. I don't really see Ronald Jones or Davis really filling in and taking that over. It should be probably, Pollard getting the majority of the touches, maybe Dak getting in some sneaks, but that's about it. With that, I'm going to keep the train rolling here on my second year wide receivers that I'm really high on. Looking at last year's draft, those wide receivers went crazy early up the board. We saw a crazy amount of movement in those wide receivers. Really, the only one who kind of disappointed in that first round was Burks. But the guy who I think is getting not talked about as much compared to those like Wilson and another one is Drake London. He's my second guy here for potential superstar. He put it together. Yes, he was the first wide receiver off the board to Atlanta, but he put together a solid wide receiver first year with probably the worst quarterback play or one of the worst quarterback plays in the NFL last year. And I swear if Wilson didn't have that big year, kind of, or Olave, that he kind of would have been more talked about because he still put together a solid rookie performance. ADP right now of 52, wide receiver 25 off the board. So you're getting him at a late wide receiver 2, very early wide receiver 3. This is where kind of breaking it down, looking actually at the stats was kind of crazy because the Falcons were the number 1 rushing offense in the league last year. For the first 9 to 10 weeks, he had Marcus Mariota as quarterback, who was very, very poor. I think Kyle Pitts led the league in uncatchable ball rate, and Drake London was also up there. And like I said, Mariota, who actually was a pretty accurate passer, just was poor. And Drake London's stats last year, he had 72 catches on 112 targets for 866 yards and 4 touchdowns. You're like, okay, that's actually pretty good for a rookie.
Yeah.
If you look at the just on the fringe of 1,000 yards, this is where it kind of gets crazy because we saw Ritter come into the year last year. Ritter really didn't pop off the charts, but he showed a connection with London that was something that you really should look out for. And maybe it was just London like getting really good at the end, improving, or it was just their strong chemistry that they built through rookie mini camp or whatnot. So when Ritter came in and took over at quarterback, Ritter started I think the last 4 weeks. Garrett, I think it was 4 or 5 weeks, and in those weeks, Drake London had 7 catches on 11 targets for 70 yards, 7 catches on 9 targets for 96 yards, 5 catches on 8 targets for 47, and then 6 catches for 8 targets for 120. He had a 31% target share. That is alpha level target share right there. Even on a team that doesn't throw the ball that much. This is where it gets kind of a thing that's just eye popping. So I took those last 5 games where he kind of had a good stretch. He had 1 game out of the first 10 where he had over 80 yards, and I think it was week 2. That was all with Marcus Mariota. Ritter steps in. He averages 86 yards per game in the final 5 games. You take those averages with Ritter in over a 17-game average. I know this is not crazy realistic. You're going to have some outlier games, whatnot. But if you literally just take the average from those last 5 games, over a 17-game average, he had 160 targets, 1,400 yards. That puts him up there at that, top dog level alpha. And
Yeah, that's better than like Jalen Waddle last year.
Yeah, I get, and like I said, he had a great stretch. Don't get me wrong, but you're seeing a trend, with like Ritter. And the thing is with Ritter is, they could have went out. They had a high pick this year. They could out and got one of the, try to get one of those top quarterbacks on the board. But they're showing faith in him, and they're going to stick with Ritter. Kind of try to build around him. They bring in Robinson. Pitts is back, fully healthy. But this is where it's like, they don't add much competition to the wide receiver room. They bring in Scotty Miller, who's been probably wide receiver 4/5 for the Bucks for the past couple of years, and then Matt Collins, who kind of had his career year last year with the Raiders. I think he had like 800 yards, but that was a lot due to Waller and Renfro being injured all season for the most part, in my opinion. But yeah, and so if Ritter, you see these rookie quarterbacks usually take the big step from their rookie season to their sophomore year. I kind of talked about it, Kenny Pickett last week. You see that big step. If they're handing the keys over to Ritter, you've seen the connection with London. Like I said, Pitts could come back. I don't see it taking a huge effect though into London's target share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, London, he had a solid year completely stats wise if you look at the compilation of the whole season. It's even more surprising when you look at like more in depth on what that team's identity was. They were run the ball, run the ball, run the ball, and even when it's a passing situation, run the ball some more. It was completely comical, but you are hitting the nose right on the head talking about Mariota last year. It was really, as a former number 2 overall pick guy who has kind of been moved around the league, he was put into a situation where, hey, we know he's not the guy, we know he's not the future, and unfortunately, he kind of drug Drake London down with him, or else we could have really seen him get, maybe that 134 more yards that he needed to hit that 1,000-yard mark. It really doesn't seem too far fetched if you would have had a few more passes thrown his way. But looking into this season, it's pretty apparent that they are going to have kind of a 2 alpha situation in their in the receiving room, with him and Kyle Pitts being the 2 not only top dogs but the big dogs. They're both very large human beings, but they're going to have a pretty good opportunity with kind of the sole focus of the offense still being through the run game, still likely seeing a lot of stacked boxes as people try to stop Bijan. It's going to be an interesting one, and I think there's a really good shot that London does take that leap that you're talking about. And if they really do show some more trust in Ritter, hand him the keys like you're saying, that could be a huge, huge value on a guy going in the 5th round. All right, so we are going to keep the train rolling with wide receivers from 2022.
We like that class. We like the class.
Last year's class was a really good one, and the first round was great. Like Caleb said, Traylon Burks was probably the only one who you're kind of left with a unsatisfactory taste after the first round. But Chris Olave, who went 3rd after Drake London and Garrett Wilson in the draft last year, Chris Olave really had an interesting start to the season because his first game he opens up with 3 targets, and then he has 2 back-to-back games, 13 targets, all while Mike Thomas is still healthy and looking good. After that, Mike Thomas went down and then struggled with injuries the rest of the year. But it was a situation where, Olave is dealing with a revolving door of quarterbacks, mixture with Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston kind of back and forth coming in and out. All that being, it really disrupts a lot of the players' timings and trying to develop chemistry with their quarterback. Well, this year he finally gets some stability as the team has traded for Derek Carr, or sorry, not traded, signed as a free agent, as a free man. Derek Carr comes to town. So right now, Olave is going off the board as off at 28. He's wide receiver 14. Last year, he finished as wide receiver 25. Now, what do we like about Derek Carr coming into town that we either saw last year or that is going to be a connection? So, I started off with this target counts right out of the gate. He had 29 targets through that first 3 games, really hitting his stride right away. Showed up looking like a vet, looking like a guy who's done it before. He also had 10 games with a 20-yard or more reception. He was 2nd in the entire league when it comes to air yards before the catch. So if not in like total throughout the season, but on a per catch basis. So out of all receivers who caught at least 60 balls, the only receiver who caught it further down the field on average per catch was Mike Evans. So that just tells us that he's a really good deep ball receiver. He's getting open and he's making the catches deep down the field. Now that gives him a better opportunity for long balls, helps him get better yardage per target, better yardage per catch. It really helps vault him up so that he doesn't need a Jalen Waddle rookie season where all of a sudden he's getting 100 catches on the season, but like 900 yards. Instead, if he manages to get 80, 90, 100 catches, it could really vault him into the 1,500 yard range. And if we look at Derek Carr as a deep passer, he's always like throughout his career, he's been a top 10 deep passer in the league. Last year, he was number 8, and he had Devontae Adams, who he helped carry to a wide receiver 2 finish. I don't say carry because Devontae Adams is one of the best receivers in the league, if not the best. But having a stable quarterback helps do that. We've also seen support other high performing fantasy receivers in the past. We saw him with a combo of Amari Cooper and Crabtree years ago, and then we saw him after those guys left with Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller. Usually, his alpha receiver in the room, he's able to support them, and even if there is a number 2, he can support that player as well. So Chris Olave, really good deep ball player, now paired with a really good deep ball quarterback. Going off the board in the third round right now. Early third might be changing depending on how things vault as we get closer to draft season. But there is a guy that you can easily end up seeing, hey, all of a sudden he's a first round receiver and he's part of the next gen team stepping up and being the new mantle for wide receivers in the league.
Yeah, I want to add one thing here, Garrett. You're talking about Derek Carr's deep ball ability. Just proven. Devontae Adams finished as a wide receiver 2 last year. What was he really known for in Green Bay? Getting a crap ton of catches,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of targets. He had, I would say, a drop off in receptions from when he played with Aaron Rodgers days. And this is the surprising thing is his average yards per reception. The 3 or 4 monster years he had with Green Bay and with Aaron Rodgers averaged right around 12 yards reception. And last year he had 15.2, a career high. His career high before that was 13.3. So almost a full 2 yards per reception more. And when you look at that over a 100-yard reception or 100 receptions average, that is quite impressive on the amount of deep balls that he's bringing in. He's averaging a deep target. That's what you can say because a deep target is considered 15 yards, so he's averaging almost a deep target. But obviously there's yards after catch and such, but just impressive year all around. So that is kind of it. Like Garrett said, we're gonna talk about a couple honorable mentions here that we wanted to briefly talk about, but not break down. Obviously, we have a love for the first 3 wide receivers off the board last year. Jameson Williams, obviously had that injury. Treylon Burks was kind of the only real stinker in that taste, but you saw flashes of what he could be. But we like these wide receivers, and Garrett likes Pollard. Pollard is going to probably become a favorite for a lot of people. Probably the more getting in. I think there's just a little bit of concern right now as if they bring in another running back, but right now I think that's maybe the only holdup. I think Pollard, I think a lot of people like him. Obviously, like you said, Garrett, just the fact that he finished so high last year with Zeke having 12 touchdowns is crazy.
Yeah.
And so that's just a stat. I'm going to hit my 2 honorable mentions, and I'll let you hit your 2. I started with my 2 superstars were wide receivers, but my 2 honorable mentions are running backs. Number 1, Breece Hall. I get it. Had a nasty torn ACL last year. It's tough for guys to come back full their first year. But Breece Hall, what we saw in those first 7 games, basically 6 games, was exactly what the Jets drafted him for and what you expected and what you saw him in college, all that stuff. He comes in the league and kind of comes in, hot, averaging 5.8 yards a carry in those games, and also the work that he got in the receiving game was pretty good as well. And so, he gets Aaron, who we've seen Aaron like to throw the ball to Aaron Jones like in the years past. If you're a Packer fan, Aaron Jones is immensely used in the passing game. Right now, the only real threat in that passing game, I guess, that could share some of Breece Hall's targets would be Michael Carter at the running back. But we saw him get faded out last year from a guy who was, a third-round draft pick the year before. Right now, I wouldn't say there's much competition for Breece Hall. The biggest factor is just if he's healthy, and it might take him 6 games, 7 games to get back into it, kind of like we saw with J.K. Dobbins last year.
Mhm.
And so, and then we saw Dobbins kind of, come back into form at the end of the year. And so that brings my second guy, J.K. Dobbins. And like I was saying, he started off the year slow last year. He came in, had that nasty torn ACL right before the season started in 2021. Took the whole year to recover. Was supposed to come back week 1. They put him on the pup. He came back in and he looked slow, looked hurt, kind of still like he wasn't fully there those first, I would say, 4 weeks. And I'll just give you that. He had 23 yards, 41 yards, 44 yards, 15 yards, averaging right around 3 yards a carry. And then it just seemed like it clicked for him. He kind of came back. Dobbins as a rookie was really good at getting yards per carry. In those last 4 games, he had 15 for 120, 13 for 125, 12 for 59, 17 for 93, averaging right around 7 yards a carry in those last 3 games or 4 games. So you saw him kind of fully get healthy. I kind of expect the same thing with Hall, but the thing is with Dobbins, he's coming in the season fully healthy. Their only really competition is Gus Edwards, who, Gus Edwards getting up there for age. Lamar is back, but, Ravens like to run the ball. So I think Dobbins could step into that lead role, get a majority of the carries, and we've seen him be very efficient in the past with those carries.
Yeah, I think both those guys really have a good opportunity this year. And going where they are too, if they can kind of get off onto the right step at the beginning of the season, then we're in for a treat with both those guys. Hall, a lot of opportunity through the passing game and in the touchdowns. Dobbins, that Ravens running attack just is average like 6 yards a carry, and that's kind of where Dobbins has been throughout his career too, which is just a colossal number that only the elite of the elite even come close to.
Yeah.
My 2 honorable mentions that I both really like. One is Jahmyr Gibbs, who, if we're going to talk about rookie running backs, yes, Bijan is probably a layup for potential next superstar, so we didn't want to just go over that. But Jahmyr Gibbs was the second running back off the board who went at 12.
Yes.
12.
Lions first pick.
That's 12th overall in the draft. Lions traded down a couple times, gained some draft capital, and then they jumped on the opportunity to take Gibbs, and he went high. It is very rare that we see running backs go before the first half of the draft in the first round, and Gibbs going is where he did. They clearly have a plan for him. They think he's a special talent. And last year we saw Jamal Williams put in 17 rushing touchdowns for Detroit. So there's a lot of not only good touchdown opportunity there, but Swift left town, Jamal Williams left town, and now the running back room is completely changed. So David Montgomery was signed in free agency as a veteran option. Now Jahmyr Gibbs comes to town, a really good pass catching back, and a lot of opportunity there for some big fantasy juicy touchdown plays.
Yep.
My second guy on the list here, Javonte Williams. Going into a Sean Payton system, if he can come back from injury, he did kind of have a little bit of a nastier knee injury this past season.
Yeah.
And he's still hoping to be ready for game 1. But as the season goes on this year, I think he kind of comes back to form. He was a former second-round pick who really, after his rookie season, everybody was very, very high on. Melvin Gordon was getting ready to leave town, came back on a light deal before Javonte eventually went down with injury last year. Now going into season 3, Russ Wilson, we're hoping bounces back and kind of takes a step back to his normalcy. Last year was an anomaly for him. They get an elite head coach and Sean Payton back into the room where his running backs throughout his history have been extremely successful. So Javante's in a good position once he does come back to succeed. So in the meantime, if he misses any games, P. Ryan's in a great position as well to capitalize on some fantasy value. But both those guys, I think, are really good options to become potential next first rounders, potential next superstars, and join Caleb's Brees Hall and J.K. Dobbins up at
That's
the top.
right. That's right. Yeah, I'm getting there on Gibbs. I'm getting more and more into it. The more you see the excitement when they drafted him in that room. They obviously had great, ideas for why they wanted Gibbs, and then you heard a lot of rumors that Gibbs wasn't going to fall past 20 anyways. There was a lot of teams looking to get him in that range or jump up. Don't know if those are all true, but still, it shows that a lot of teams valued him, they liked him, and they view him as a first round pick. And like you said, the Lions grabbing at 12 is huge. But the one thing with the Javonte, I think that goes, yes, it's a nasty injury he had. Don't get me wrong. He had a solid rookie performance, splitting the carries with Melvin Gordon. They both finished, I think, as in the top as RB2, late or low RB1 range when that first year. And then the next year, same thing. He split carries right away with Melvin Gordon. But the thing is, he had 22 targets in three and a third game. So 22 targets over 3 and a third game. So he had a lot of the passing work. So we saw Russell Wilson do a lot of dinks and dumps. He had 11 catches his first week. So Russell Wilson was feeding him the targets. And the thing is, what we've seen with Sean Payton in the past is he likes to use two sets backfields, but both of those backs have been very efficient in their ways. Both of them have been fantasy relevant. So even if P. Ryan comes in, has a solid role, Javonte Williams could really carve out just thinking back of Ingram and Kamara, or Ingram and Spiller, or Spiller and Bush, just like with Peyton, is he knows how to use his running backs. He knows how to use them in very efficient ways that set up nice for them, and it actually lead to great fantasy relevance for in the fantasy world. Usually when you think of RBBC, you're like, oh shoot, you don't want anything to deal with it. I'm fine, especially with Williams going so late this year compared to years past where he is. If he comes back, which we're hearing he is fully healthy, if he comes back and even if it takes him a couple weeks to get going, I still think that you're going to be worth the investment there, and he could potentially become that superstar.
And it's one of those things that, yes, you are getting the discount right now because we do not know the status of him coming back from that knee. We saw other running backs kind of take their time coming back or rush back too early. If he was ready to go and we knew he was 100%, we knew he was Adrian Peterson, 2012 all over again.
NBC. Yeah.
He'd really be boosted up draft boards. But right now, you are getting him absolutely cheap. So take this time and jump on that opportunity.
Yeah. I'm sure he would have been considered a superstar last year at this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that kind of wraps it up for this week's episode. Next week, we're going to be going over some quarterback tiers. So we're going to be breaking down the position, going down over, what's the tier one of QBs, how many guys are in there, what's our expectations for them versus the next tier, and how big are these groups versus, if is this guy kind of standing alone by himself? Is he at the top or the bottom of the tier? And how do these tiers work? So, going to be touching on that a little bit. Excited to go over those guys with you. Last year, the quarterback position was an interesting one because it just kind of pivoted and changed our mindset on, for years it was the late round quarterback, and now it's, hey, get one before they're gone.
Yeah. You saw the top 5 last year really carry people. So,
But all right, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.